I didn't really understand the level and the detail that was involved in that. So that's probably my first like holy cow moment, you know.
But now it's so critical to build so fast and reliably that they're actually bringing us in on the power side, so you're on the fiber side and vice versa. This is Ed O'Brien with Advanced Business Communications. This is our first podcast. Looking forward to doing more of these and getting out there and giving some good information and good conversation out there to our industry. And we're going to get a little kind of introduction on ABC and how we started. We started in 1986. Prior to that, I was working for the General Electric Company, and we were involved in the launch of selling telecommunications supplies through GE right at the divestiture. So we were in this from the beginning. One of the things that I looked for when I started looking at getting a job with GE was something that was future-proof. I had a father who had a business for 30 years and it went out of business because he was not staying up with technology and the service ability. We were going from the electromechanical age, just to date myself a little bit, into the transistor world, and it changed everything, and he went out of business. And I'd said, I don't want to see that happening. If I'm going to start my own business, I need something future-proof or a career that was in future-proof. So I really stuck to fiber optics as I got into that right away in 1986 with GE. We actually installed the first enterprise fiber optic backbone in the United States. It was done in California with Wells Fargo in Concord, California. We had a partnership with Pacific Telesis at the time with GE, and they came up with the electronics, which we had to get from Israel, and the fiber we had to supply somewhere else. But again, there was none installed at that time. So I literally have been in from the beginning of this. And when I decided that I wanted to move home because GE decided they were going to get out of the business. And I decided I would go home and figure out what I would do. And I had gotten approached by one of the manufacturers that we were selling at GE, a company called Brand Rex, out of Willimantic, Connecticut. And they were manufacturing cabling infrastructure solutions, both copper and fiber, for the telecommunications industry. And with that, it was kind of like Kenny when he started with us, right? He didn't start with us. When he started this business, he was working for a distributor, coming from the rag business, selling textiles in New York City. And I was schlepping, commission-only job at Brand Rex, which was kind of an unknown, tertiary brand. It was probably not a leading brand at all. It was something that they weren't really on the map. And in New York City, we were able to get some jobs. And our first job was actually with J.P. Morgan, where we had sold some fiber into them at their 60 Wall Street building. And from that, we, decided to go into the rep business with Brand Rex. And we were able to solidify a position with fiber against AT&T in New York City. And then I realized once we had that, we needed to get other lines in order to really build the business. And my real focus was to sell something that was, synergistic to the Corning offering. So we sold all the infrastructure products at the time in the beginning. And then over time, we really focused on what really mattered and what we could specialize in. We wanted to partner with companies that were the leading companies at the time after we had made a name for ourselves. And we wanted to minimize the number of companies in which we would represent. A lot of our competitors out there have many, many lines, some 10, 15, 30 lines. So today we've really crystallized it to the point where we have Corning, Eaton, and Airspan, which was just put on recently as a new line for us. But the Corning has the whole depth of product for the fiber optic industry. Matter of fact, one of the things that we're kind of proud of, both Corning and Eaton are 175-year-old companies, and they've been at it a long time. And the thing we like about it is that they acquire a lot of companies. So there's many, many products, and a lot of our competitors have to have multiple manufacturers to give the same solution. So the fact that we have two companies with everything under one roof in the specialties in which they are has really given us the lead in the marketplace, to date. And, we have Ken DePalo here, and I want to introduce him first, and we'll let him, speak about his experience and his take on this. But Kenny, I remember when, we first tried to get together, right? You had already taken a job. I think I called you on the day you accepted a job with somebody else, and you
That's
said,
correct.
I wish you would have called me one day earlier, but I've already given my word. And I knew right away that I was speaking with somebody with integrity. And so, like me, you got to practice on, tertiary lines and really had to sell and hit the pavement and work with, regional type distributors. The national distributors were only representing the main line. So I think it was you could tell us a little bit about that experience, because I think it really bode well to give you the experience and the knowledge of what you were up against. And then when you decided to join us maybe 2 years later, I think it was, no lie, a kind of a match made in heaven for us. And we've been doing this now together for, is it
Almost
20 years? So, with that, tell us a little bit about, your experience and coming on board, and kind of give us a, little story from, then to now.
Yeah, sure. So again, Ken DePalo, director of sales at ABC. And as Ed mentioned, I joined the firm in uh, April of 2007. So we're coming up on 19 years. So um, again, prior to that, had some sales experience, but in outside of the industry. And I think similar to what Ed had mentioned, I grew up in a family of uh, my dad was in construction, as were a number of other people in my family. So I grew up always interested in technology and hands-on experience. So I think that has helped me, um, throughout the experience here. But as Ed mentioned, I did first jump into the industry was with a regional distributor with an office in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania. I would say that the fact that maybe we didn't meet or we didn't join each other as soon as I got in is, I would say, is probably a blessing in disguise, because I did get a chance to again understand the business a little bit more, and also build relationships, having those lines that weren't, they were great lines, but they weren't a Corning and they weren't an Eaton. Um, so kind of a little bit of the road of hard knocks, I would say, but building relationships, right? And then when Ed and I, finally got together a few years later, I think that was a benefit, because I had made relationships with certain, end users or consulting firms and contractors, and then so I was able to parlay those relationships into opportunities with Corning and eventually what became Eaton, and through the acquisitions that were made. So I think it was probably for the best. Seems like a lifetime ago, but certainly we've grown together, as being part of the company, and added other folks along the way. And as Ed mentioned, just the acquisitions that Corning has made, the organic growth, the acquisitions that Eaton has made for sure, and continues to make to this day. And now the recent acquisition to Airspan, which is somewhat of an acquisition, but we had a relationship with that team from when they were part of the Corning portfolio. So certainly excited to have that on board as well, and to round out the portfolio. Um, and again, as Ed mentioned, there are three lines, but certainly on the Corning and the Eaton side, there's a number of different products under those umbrellas. So it's you know great opportunities with the lines that we rep, and certainly a great time to be in the space with these offerings that we have, right? With the trajectory that we see with what's happening in the industry. So it's been a great run so far. Really looking forward to keeping it going, and the next 5 years and beyond for sure.
So Ken, I'm just going to put you on the spot here,
Sure.
because, in the beginning, there's a lot of, like you said, it's felt like another lifetime ago, but boy, we were scrapping and scraping and really going anything come to your mind when I ask you what are some of the first memories you have of being a road warrior with advanced business communications when we first started?
I mean, I think that first, I guess
Some of the
understanding
challenges,
what's that?
or some of the challenges even of those days.
I think the challenge for me initially was really getting into the granular details of the technology, and especially on the fiber side, because Eaton at the time for us was a little bit more limited, and I'll say a little bit more commodity based. Now it certainly is not, but at the time, they really understanding again the technology and how we help people solve those problems, and understanding really that part of it. I really had not been doing that type of thing. I think the business that I was in before, and again, it was a great business, but much more contractor focused. Um, and obviously we deal with a number of contractors now. They're great partners of ours, but the challenge of I would say the difference in helping the end customer where the material is getting deployed solve those challenges, and understanding what we could do to help solve those challenges, right? So I think for me, it was also learning about the resources and what we brought to bear, and understanding it from that perspective. I think that took me a little while to really understand how all those pieces came into play. Um, but certainly, I remember listening to, I'd say it's probably the first few weeks on the job, going in at the time with, Doug Coleman, who was a legend in the industry, and going into, I mean, at the time it was Lehman Brothers, right? But other companies like that, and really sitting down and listening to, you know, the road mapping of technology, or what understanding what they were doing. And I think I was also taken back by how much they really relied on, you and Doug and the team to help them through some of those challenges, right? It was very conversational. It was very, hey, here's our problem, or here's what we're doing. But it was just as much of a dialogue where they wanted to understand what Corning was doing, and how Corning was partnering with the Cisco's and, all those types of electronics vendors as well, right? And really developing solutions. So that was definitely different than what I had been dealing with before. Again, now it seems like second nature.
Yeah.
But I think that was really eye opening. The level that those meetings where you and Doug and others were sitting in, and really getting an appreciation, for that piece of it. I think that's really, again, it's second nature now, but looking back on it, you know, I was really taken back by, I think I go back to what I said before, right? I was always very kind of a geeky when it came to that part of it, like really understanding parts and pieces, but I didn't really understand the level and the detail that was involved in that. So that's probably my first, like, holy cow moment.
Yeah, the deep dive into the technology. And looking back, I feel like we really realized that we had to be subject matter experts. We had to bring in, educate them on the options that they had. And I remember a little history where we started the end user roundtable before your time. And I say this because we lived in a world without real standards. It was all new. There was no customers or end users that were talking to each other and sharing things and sharing some of the infrastructure bills. Everybody kept it top secret because they were all financial institutions wanting to keep everything to themselves. So we had started an end user roundtable, maybe with 3 or 4 financial firms that we would get together, and they would be decision makers within those companies, and they would, you know, talk about things and share things. It kind of really was the start of us being, a team, and going after those markets and really getting them to trust us as, partners and helping them deploy these technologies. And, Corning has come a long way. And one little blip I always like to tell in our history is that, you know, right before, the dot-com era, and everything was driving to Y2K, and the world was going to end once that hit 2000. I remember Corning coming to us, and we were doing such a great job, and we had such huge backlog, almost like today, where it was a year out. They had the parlay orders on fiber, it was going crazy, and Corning asked us to drop all our other lines and take them on exclusively. And we had other lines in the copper world, and that's when we decided, let's just focus on fiber, let's go with it. You'll sign an exclusive with Corning. And within 30 days, the sky fell. And the backlog went away, and the dot bomb blew up, and there we were, left with, almost no sales, no other lines. And I say this because we got lucky in the fact that Beeline was looking for a manufacturer's rep. And we, again, wanted to keep things that were congruent with our offering. And Beeline at the time sold, wire basket and ladder rack, I believe, or maybe not. I can't remember. But they sold things just to support the cabling infrastructure. And we did a good job. But we got fortunate because, Beeline ended up getting, acquired by Eaton. Eaton must have acquired at least 12 companies since we've taken them on, and they've gone from, infrastructure and cabinets and wire basket and ladder rack and hooks and all kinds of hardware, which we needed on the job site, but they started really getting into the power distribution units, and they bought a couple of companies. They got big in that business. We started getting good sales and customers, and the same thing we did with Corning by bringing in the expertise from Eaton and educating people. But, Eaton's gone from, wire basket to cabinets to EPDUs. Then they acquired a company, that were making the same products to grab more market share. And then they turned around and bought a company that made, self-contained data centers. And now they bought another company for $10 billion that does liquid cooling. So we're very fortunate we have these big companies that can make these kind of acquisitions and maintain leadership in the industry. And I think we've done the same with ABC. And synergistically today, we have power and fiber. And, in the AI world and in the data center world, or even in a enterprise situation, you have, four things they need, right, to build: land, they say water, power, and fiber. So now we have three out of the four because, the water is the chilled water, is the liquid cooling. So we really worked hard and long over the time to crystallize this offering. So we're actually kind of in the sweet spot right now, and the time is good as this explosion of AI goes on. And then to add to that with the airspan, bringing that on because, cellular networks are big. It's great to have, wireless networks. It's great to have fiber optic infrastructure. It's great to have power infrastructure. But, today we live with our cell phone. So cell signals are very important, whether we're in the building, outside the building, on the campus. So now that we're reaching out to that community as well, we feel like in the enterprise space where we're focused, we're not focused in the carrier world, we're not focused in the big hyperscale world. We're really focused with the enterprise end user and bringing them solutions and obviously help with the things that they need to build. And we're going to get into that as, what has that done for us in acquiring big projects. So, big business likes to do business with big business. So I think that's where we've been successful as a small rep firm, to have the best of both worlds because, we're not a big firm, but yet we sit between, big manufacturers and big customers. And that's where we are going to persist and go after these opportunities. So really exciting, really looking forward to, Kenny. And, I wanted to get into it a little bit about, from your perspective as a partner and director of sales, and driving the sales. What do you see as our sales blueprint moving forward as it relates to, the scenario we're in today?
So I think our blueprint has been pretty consistent, right? In terms of delivering the message to our customers, listening, understanding the challenges that they're trying to solve for, but also being, really a partner in that effort, right? So um, it's a constant education process. I think that they lean on us just as much as we lean on them. They lean on us to understand what we're seeing, right? Because they're involved in their world somewhat, right? And though they may, I'd say it's a pretty fraternal group um, of folks, especially as some of our contacts move from, end user to end user, let's say in that world, or consultant to consultant, contractor to contractor. So they do talk to each other, right? But I do think that they lean on us to understand what we're seeing outside of their world. So I don't think that will change for us. I think there's more that we can offer um, from a guidance perspective because of the acquisitions that you know Corning and Eaton have made, and now bringing on Airspan, right? So I think that that's pretty consistent. Um, but I would say the other piece of it is where we've always been successful is to surround the opportunity, right? In any given opportunity, we're dealing with everybody in that ecosystem, from the folks that eventually will be installing it, you know, through the stack up to the end user, right? The consultant, the contractor, the distributor partner, right? Um, so I think the blueprint for us doesn't change. I think it scales by not only, folks that we've added to our team, right? And some seasoned veterans that we've added, right? So it helps us get in front of more opportunities and continue to address those things at a larger scale, not only from our internal team, but again, also from the products that we
Yeah.
now can offer. And as you said, I mean, we're fortunate, I guess, and because of what's happening, right, in the strategic acquisitions that companies have made, especially on the Eaton side for sure. I mean, you mentioned, the company that is doing now the liquid cooling, and and the kind of the quick deployment of the power for the data centers as well. So I think we're fortunate in that regard, um, because it makes it easier for us to grow as the industry goes, as our customers grow, um, because of
Now you bring up a good point that I want to expand on a little bit, and that is, you call it the stack, the ecosystems, and I think that's very important. And I think one of our, you know, kind of bedrocks in our foundation is that we always prided ourselves on keeping our commitment to the customer. And I think the customer learned that they could rely on us. I always loved the saying when we looked at their list of everything they had to do in a build out, which gets complicated. You have an end user, they hire a consultant, they got to bid it out to contractors, they got to buy from distribution. And we use the same kind of reference point all the time to say, you know what, if we're involved, we won't sleep at night until we deliver. And we're going to make sure that we deliver it on time. We're going to make sure that you can count on us. We're going to make sure that you can communicate. One of the things we learned very early in this business was we're going to, things are going to go along. You're going to make mistakes. I used to describe it like our golf game, you hit a drive in the woods, but you should see our recovery shot, right? We're never going to give up, and we're going to get it back on course. And they rely on that, and that's become kind of a main ingredient for us. They really rely on us. And we took that through that stack, right? Like, we're very fortunate today because contractors, for example, or consultants, they want to work with us because of those factors. And they know that we're only going to do everything we can, and that our track record is to make it a successful install, which makes them succeed and makes them be able to do more of that work based on, learning and delivering and having the client, the end user, be satisfied and not to worry about our piece of it because we're going to deliver that. So I think we bring up a good point where it's managing that whole ecosystem over time where they can rely on us. And that gives us a big advantage, to have them want us to be involved in a project. And so a lot of times now we'll get calls, like Ken said, we have many, many customers, especially in the financial community. We have one gentleman that, was with UBS, and then they go to TD Bank, and then they go to, Millennium, and then they go somewhere else. And because while they go to these places, they bring us along with them to continue to help and serve them. So I think that's been a big part of our blueprint. And I think with all companies, we do that. But I think now we're in a situation where we can really go after the package solution, meaning, Before, in our market, it's kind of interesting. You get a contractor wins a bid, or you get a consultant that's going to write a specification. A lot of people like to spread it around, right? In our industry. All right, ABC is going to work with the fiber, and, XYZ, we're going to work with the power. We gave them this, we'll give this to somebody else. But now it's so critical to build so fast and reliable that they're actually bringing this in on the power side, so you're on the fiber side and vice versa. So it's kind of really helped us dovetail into that whole thought of having synergistic offerings that create a total build. So,
Yeah, and I think so. A couple things. First of all, just jumping back to what you had mentioned before, right? I think maybe it's timely, right? It's NFL playoff season, right? So sometimes you have to go to the audible, right? So things are going to happen, right? Not everything does get delivered on time, but being able to deliver the message early, right? So the customers can pivot as much as possible, and kind of work through some of those challenges, right? So we don't shy away from that, right? And always try to help them, address those issues as they're ongoing through a project.
yeah,
The other thing I would say is, just like I mentioned before, where, Corning and Eaton are working with the Ciscos or the NVIDIAs to understand what they're doing, right? So then they can, have packages or portfolios or products to be able to address those particular,
installing their products, right?
right? But what we've done, and I think what's helped us in the effort to, like you had said, right, where now they're bringing us along for a fuller package of products, right, from the different lines that we rep, is because we've got the folks from Corning and Eaton talking to each other as well, so that they can understand, okay, well, you're deploying this GPU, or you're deploying this Arista or Cisco gear. This is what the requirement is to from the fiber perspective, right? But then that also creates, okay, how much power do you need to be able to address that, right? And how do you fit that in a cabinet? And how do you, address that with, not only liquid cooling in the extreme senses, right? But even containment or thermal management, right? And making sure that all comes together, right? So I think that's another thing that we've really done a great job with internally with our team, is to bring those folks together so that they can understand it, where they may not always be talking to, a fiber vendor may not be always talking to a cabinet or a containment vendor or whatever, but because we have that under one portfolio and we have the resources within those companies, they can talk to each other and kind of understand it from a better, perspective as well. So it's definitely helped us. Right. And if we can get all those people sitting in the room at the same time, then that's the holy grail, right, for us.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the key in sales, right? You're trying to sell something, you're trying to bring value, but again, if you can get their audience in time to educate, people don't like changing, or making changes if it's working. And the problem we have in our industry in total for everybody is that the business moves so fast, the technology moves so fast, and if you're not really looking at those advancements and adopting to them, you're going to get left behind, especially today, where how many times have we seen it, Kenny, where, somebody's, in the old days, somebody's using a 62.5, and now we're going to 50 micron, but they don't want to go to 50 micron because they, that's what they buy. That's what they're used to. And
Right.
they're afraid to move to the next technology. And I think we're at a point now where people realize you have to listen, you have to communicate, you have to have this kind of conversation to watch that technology go by and grab on the opportunity it has. But, in selling, I always like someone said to me, what's the definition of selling? And it's changing people's mind for a living,
Right.
right? And it gets a lot easier when, they can rely on you as subject matter experts, and they rely on you, and they know that if you make a mistake, we're going to own up to it and correct it. And that's one thing I wanted to mention before when I was talking, is that, a lot of people, especially I did this in the beginning, and my customers taught me this well. I remember one time working with Pacific Telesis when I was at GE, and we had messed up. And I was dodging him. I didn't want to call him. I know he's going to yell and scream at me, and I was hiding a little bit, and I was, in my 20s, and, I felt like a little kid hiding in my room. And then he just said to me, "Ed, if I shoot you in the head, just take the bullet, and we can go from there, okay? And don't kill me slowly, just kill me quick, and then we can recover." And
Yep.
that's really been probably one of the models of our thing here, is that we're just honest, and again, the integrity and the reliability of that.